Welcome back to Dialogue 340. We're still here at Featherleaf Inn. We have Mr. former Senator Emmett Hansen himself in the seat. We just want to thank him once again for joining us. We are on the Delegate to Congress trail. Daren, I'll let you kick us off again.
So first, I'll say I want you to introduce yourself to the Virgin Islands public. It's not just St. Croix. We got people listening from or watching, I should say, from St. Thomas and John and the greater world. Introduce yourself to the greater world. Let them know a little bit of your background.
Okay. Good evening, everyone, near and far. My name is Emmett Hansen, and I am running to be the Democratic delegate to Congress. The reason why I said that is because I put in a lot of time over the decades. I've been a politician officially for 4 years when I was in the Senate. Other than that, I've been helping to build a party to help my islands. And the reason why I say my islands, I'm just not a Crucian. I come from a long line of Crucians, but I also identify as a Virgin Islander because I finished high school in St. Thomas. Lots of good people. It's kind of sketchy for me personally. Nothing they did, but I didn't expect to be there. But I have lifelong friends that I've made in St. Thomas and St. John. But in particular, this race for me is one for the future. I've been elected before, so it's not new. I don't have any personal ego about it. I see it as a job. But because I spent a decade on my own time working within the DNC, and when I say my own time, the party never sent me. I paid my airfare, I paid my hotel, I paid my transportation, I paid for food. Because it was that important to me to make sure that our concerns were not swept under the rug. There have been too many inequities that we have suffered for so long. When you talk about our aging population, it is a shame that they paid in every cent, the same as someone who lived in the States, and got nothing, practically nothing for it. They got shortchanged, which meant that their health care was inadequate. The pittance that they made during their working career, and we know our people that make a whole lot of money, right? Back in the day, $30,000 was a lot. Today, with our cost of living, you're below the poverty level, making 30, right? So the fact that we can pay for everything and we don't qualify for this, we don't qualify for that. And I know this is before you guys' time, but in times of war, Vietnam, World War II, the Gulf War, they take soldiers in a disproportionate amount from the Virgin Islands and every other territory, including Puerto Rico, to send them for cannon fodder. But when they come home, and they come home different. They come home with problems, whether physical, mental, or both. There's no facility here. That little clinic that they have at Villa Lorraine is woefully inadequate. But then, if you can get a room, they'll send you to Puerto Rico. And the care is even worse than you can imagine. And I know this because my father and my uncle died in that facility in Puerto Rico. We can change this, but we have to be intentional in how we approach it. It's not, oh, poor me. It's no, they serve the same way how everyone else served. Treat us the right way. And even to that, I have another uncle on my father's side who's buried in Arlington. So if he's in Arlington, there's no doubt that he was an exceptional military man. Still in awe. Shouldn't somebody recognize that and just do the right thing? That is part of why I'm determined to get there to change that dynamic.
Okay, so thank you for that. So my next question would be outside of relatives, because everybody tends to, I'm not saying not to, talk about the experience with their parents and their grandparents, but outside of relatives.
Yeah, I understand.
Who inspired you to take this path, this life journey that you're on right now?
Uncle Wang Ching, former Governor Wang F. Louis. He and my mother and Cielo Maldonado grew up together. And And he always used to, it was amazing to me that he held that title, the longest serving governor, 10 years. And anytime he saw me, that whole mantle of being governor fell away. And he says, Uncle Wang Ching. And he would grab me in the hook, you know, the hook. Mm-hmm. And he would say, listen, you got good brain in your head. Use it for our people. And he was dead serious. Don't mind the affection, you know, because I literally grew up calling him uncle. But he would point out things to me, even years after he was out of office. Right there by Caribe Lumber, by the stoplight.
Yeah.
I could always find him there, right? And he said, but what are you doing? Not your job. What are you doing for the people, Emmett? And that dug into my psyche about being available, being present, doing things that would help someone else, you know? And Derek Hodge was another person. When my father passed away, God bless him, Derek sent for me because he and my father are very good friends. And these are the stories that you don't hear about these persons. And he sent for me because he was concerned. Emmett, what are you going to do? I don't know. Sit down, let's talk, you know? And looking at his humanity and the way that I saw that man agonize over someone who came into his office with a problem. He stopped what he was doing. I've seen that many times and tried to help. So those two really became my role model and also a beacon of who I should constantly try to be. Not to be them, but to have the same caring and humility and humanity to help someone who can't do anything for you. That's a big leap for someone in their 20s, because when you're 20s, you're kind of greedy. You know, you're kind of gimme, 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 because you just left the house. But to be able to step outside yourself and realize that you as an individual can help someone in ways big and more small than big, but if you could leave that person feeling a little bit better about their life, it makes you feel even better that you could do that. So those are my folks.
Mm-hmm. I will say the last question I have for this segment is, what inspired you to take your educational path? Mm-hmm. And after you did the educational path, what led you to the legislature?
That's a really good question.
We tend to have a good
I see that. I see that. I'll tell you the truth. I got a scholarship to Dillard University, and because I did a lot of different things, I was as confused as any freshman would be. I think if someone asked me, well, you know, at your base, who are you? I would say I'm a writer. I love to write. I started off actually thinking about being an art major. And when I came home for that Christmas, and my father said, well, what are you doing up there? I said, well, I'm thinking about being an art major. So he goes, yeah, that'll make you money, right? So I was like, okay, well, I'll be an English major. He's like, really? So you went from that to that? Oh, okay, go ahead, do your thing. But I teamed it with marketing. And the marketing was because my father had his own business and upholstery shop. And I loved the way how he drew people in, right? So growing up there, it just came naturally to me. But for my master's studies, I studied public administration, because having worked in the States and then come home and seen what wasn't happening. For example, I went to teach. It took them all year to pay me. All year.
What year was this?
I came back in '85, and I had a knee injury. And so when I could finally walk again in January, Lorraine Gibbs, who was, oh yeah, Miss Lorraine Gibbs, that little dynamo, came and said, Emmett, I tell you, nobody's in the classroom teaching the children. I looked at my dad, he said, your decision. So I went in January '86. No paycheck. All right, school was over when I finally got my first, I think, 2 or 3 checks. But then I thought about it, and I ended up joining the National Guard because my English education in college was more of a classical nature. It wasn't newspaper. Oh yeah, if you if you saw a story like of a real game, you would think Shakespeare had written it. So that wasn't getting it. So I joined the National Guard, came back, and a few years later I was working at UVI, and I opted to get my master's in public education to know why things work, how do they work, how should they work. And that opened up my mind to the issues that we are having, the lack of succession planning, why somebody could get a check that they didn't earn and the businesses that you owed couldn't get paid, you know? And it was a very rude awakening. For me, coming back home and expecting it to be one way was completely opposite.
So I'll pivot off of
Yeah.
Daren. Tell us
Yes.
about your time in the legislature and what it was like to first run for the legislature and then being a senator for 4 years.
You know, it's interesting because what led me to run was actually much in a setting like this. Whereas I was hosting a TV show called Topics on WTJX. And I remember my first show. Oh, let me say this. We just lost Tony Brown, the television journalist, and I tried to mimic his energy and his preparedness. So I tried to do the same thing when I was given that opportunity. And so he just passed, so R.I.P. Mr. Brown. My first show was about AIDS. And I had one guy from here, and he was an airline steward. And he was very open in that I partied until I contracted this thing. Said his name, was very open. There was a young man who he was working, he loved his wife. And he said that she got bored and cheated on him and then gave it to him. What we did with him was we sat him behind some blinds and backlit him. And then there was a lady who was very religious whose husband brought it home. So what we did was we let them tell their stories and about the need to protect yourself and such. My first show almost made me quit because all of these experiences became very personal that night. And then I realized from the feedback that I cracked an egg, that all of a sudden these people weren't sinners and this and that and the other, but they were actual people who came forward to share this with the thought of helping others avoid it, and that they needed to be treated like people. So as such, I started looking around the community and trying to find other things that I could tear the veil off of for the benefit of our community. And people started telling me that, you know, you should run, you should run, you should run. At first I was like, me ain't running for a pig. Leave me alone, right? That was my first thing. I mean, I ain't running for nothing. That's old people thing, right? But the deeper I delved into the more base side of our community, I realized that perhaps I could take this energy and solve things. So I ran with the intention of solving like 4 problems. And I finished them in 2 terms. So first was we had a fundraiser for Central High to buy a copier for the English department. A young woman by the name of Natasha Cummings came to my office and asked me to help. Her story is a tragic one, but we won't talk about that tonight, if you don't mind. So we were having this thing down by the rec bar with Link Edwin, who just opened it up to us. And somebody went through with a gun and was just firing shots and ran in to where we were. And this Marshal Dave Drake, I think his name was, came in and tackled him. So at that point, I realized this is a problem, right? It's not just a news story, because we had maybe 200 people in there for this karaoke. And this guy comes in firing shots. My Aunt Eleanor was in there, right? So I passed the Gun Control Act. The gun laws had not been changed from 1968. I was 7 when they changed, okay? Governor Turnbull decided, now I worked with the AG, I worked with the police commissioner, I worked with ATF, I worked with FBI, because although I had been in law enforcement, legislation was not my forte. So I said, let me get the folks who deal with this, the ones who know. Pull them in. We crafted a great bill. Even, let me give Jack his jacket, Senator Delbert Ryan calls me up. Hansen, you got some old blank definitions in here. I'm like, oh, thanks, I'll be right over. Hung up the phone, ran to his office, and he helped me out with the new definitions, the current ones, because he was a firearms master. He knew what he was talking about. Passed, I think, unanimously. And the governor vetoed it and lied. Said that a single bullet will cost you a home. He flat out lied. Well, former Senator John Bell and George Baboon O'Reilly, they're on WSCX. And they're reading the press release that the governor put out. Now, I knew both of those gentlemen, of course. So I said, listen, you're reading something that isn't based in reality. Well, you come up and you defend it yourself, John Bell, right? You come up now. So I did. So we read it he and Baboon read it paragraph by paragraph. And then John, when they finished, John Bell said something that I never in a million years thought I would hear. Oh God, Hansen, I'm sorry. I wanted to pinch him, to make sure it's him. You know John Bell, great guy, never apologized. He said, you're right in your intention, and you're right. There's nothing about that in here. The governor lied to us. Long story short, he vetoed it, we overrode him. The second one was the Infrastructure Maintenance Act, which took money from the property taxes, which used to be dumped wholly into the general fund. No property owner used to get anything out of the property taxes, much like the road tax. That does not go to the road, you see? So what I did is I took a small percentage for local roads, street lights, and potable water. Now, if WAPA had listened to me, nobody in the Virgin Islands would ever have had to deal with brown water, because maintenance and expansion was there. It's inherent in the bill. And what happened was I created 3 lock boxes, 1 for each category for here, and also did it for St. Thomas, St. John District, because that is how it's configured, right? Mm-hmm. So that money is sitting there, and they haven't done anything with it until a St. Croix senator recently took a couple $1 million out of the streetlight funding to pay for it. But you see, it's a good idea. But the reason why I can say that is because it's also a future-facing idea, because we do not maintain what we have. You see? So that changed that. So our biggest problems at that time was no street lights. It was a battle between WAPA and between public works. Who gonna pay for it? Who gonna pay for it? We'll see it there. It came out the property taxes as it should. And then the last one was the Affordable Housing Act. And in doing that, I was over housing costs and recreation. So at that time, the tenants in the federally owned housing communities in St. Thomas were having an uprising because the management was not meeting with the tenant council. They're having horrific third world problems in those buildings. right? Water smell bad. Electricity ain't coming on. People getting shot, blowing up your appliances, right? So I went to Washington. I spoke with our Assistant HUD Commissioner, Assistant Secretary Michael Liu, who's from Hawaii. And I had to go a couple of times to speak with him. And because I didn't just want to speak with him, I wanted him to come here and speak with the tenants. He found a window and he came. He actually came to the Virgin Islands, not to talk to me, not to talk to the Senate, because he already knew me from my work, but to actually sit down in a meeting with the tenants and to go there and look. So current Senator Fonseca was the executive director. I can't remember whether acting or actually working. We sat in the legislative hall, and he just wanted to throw his hands up. Assistant Secretary Liu said, if you do that, I'm going to take over this whole thing, and you will be in receivership. And I begged him not to do it because I am not one for giving up sovereignty. I believe we can solve our own problems, but damn it, you got to walk, right? Threw up his hands, and Lou took it over that night. But they fixed the problems. They made it, he made it his responsibility to ensure that all the problems which are valid was fixed as soon as possible. I still have a great deal of respect for that man. But the second one was when I did the Affordable Housing Act, which is intended to use all this government land. Of course, I know you guys know the government owns the majority of the fallow land in the territory. Well, instead of just letting it go kasha and tan, I said, let's put our people in their own homes. And the beauty of it was that we made the land, it wasn't just me, it was the legislature, the majority who supported my effort. Let me be very clear about that. So we would make the land available for a developer to build homes. But what it did was it took away 30% of the developer's costs for buying the land. However, upon the homeowner purchasing the building, the government would deed the land to them. So what happens? They would get an immediate 30% equity. Now, if you have a 30-year mortgage, that's 10 years worth of payment that you didn't pay because we gave you the land. Governor Turnbull said he couldn't afford it. Clifford Graham sat in the legislature and said, this is a $1 billion boon to the people of the Virgin Islands because you'll have all these taxes paid in perpetuity. Right? You got to pay property tax every year. You sign it, you get stamp tax. Somebody has to build it, that's employment taxes. The problem that he had was that it mandated for 500 homes a year for 5 years. But 350 on St. Croix, 100 in St. Thomas, and 50 in St. John. But Hansen, why you always want everything in St. Croix? I said, you ain't got no place to put no 350 homes. So where you want to put them?
What location did you pass?
Pretty much it could have been anywhere.
Okay.
Because it said any government land that the developer identified. But you see, the part about it, and again, I say it's future facing, because the infrastructure would have already been put in prior to the homes being built. Portable water, there's the money.
I have a question.
Sure.
There is some research done, and I'm not an ecologist. I'm lent to it. I like the work. And they said that he kind of like had core planning in terms of why we have so much runoff into the ocean and why we have so much flooding around certain areas because certain areas were not meant to be developed in that sense.
Agreed.
And also the flow of water has changed and where lands that used to be lush are now barren.
Yes.
And so what do you think about what we did in the past and then what is the fix that when we plan for the future, how are we correcting as much as we can? And what implementation we work to making sure that new infrastructure works to balance our ecology and our moving forward in progressiveness, especially in housing.
I'm so glad you asked that because, again, that's part of the Infrastructure Maintenance Act, which deals with the local roads. See, the local roads are the ones that feed into the federal roads. Like, let's take Center Line, right? Okay. The water that gets on Center Line comes off of local roads, right? But that legislation says drainage to redirect the water. So I agree with everything you said about how it happens, but if they had worked the bill, they would have redirected the water here, perhaps underneath into a natural gut.
Yes, and most of our guts are dried up.
Yeah, because construction changes the water flow. Absolutely agree with you. And that's why I made it a point to put that in. Now, going forward, right? Remember, these things that I do are forward facing.
Yeah.
Now, I believe, well, you guys are, I'm not being funny when I say you guys are too young to remember when Mumby Jew used to flood. Mumby Jew and Frantic Which is why we have the floodplain. Because I remember, I mean, we were stupid back then. You get on your bike and you ride to Mumby Jew, you ride in the water, you know. So.
You mean like when you were like as a young person riding to the
Oh,
beach?
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we ain't got to go to the beach. Let's go by Mumby Jew. Right?
Exactly. Is the point.
Yeah, I confess we're stupid. But it was fun then. Not realizing that we see somebody's dresser going floating by. We are cracking up, not realizing that somebody just lost everything.
Right.
So going forward, right, what I envision is working with the governor when I'm sent to DC, working with the governor to get the Army Corps of Engineers to help us know how, where, and when to direct this runoff. You see?
But there's so much information that's saying that people came here and they gave us a great schedule of how it should be. I read it, as I said, I'm not an ecologist, but I read so much documentation, especially like in the Mommy areas when they were saying, don't put this right here, don't put this right here, don't build it. And we still went ahead and developed spaces.
We could say the same thing about the library in town, Florence Williams. People told them, look across the street. You don't see that big gut? The water can come down here and it's going to go right in there because if you remember, the first floor is how many feet below the street. They were told.
Every time. I grew up in town. I went to the library.
Why don't we take what people are expertise on?
Because we have the wrong persons making decisions. There is no more fantastical than that. We have the wrong people making decisions who are going to tell somebody who's shooting a line, you come here to tell me what to do. Well, okay.
So
But if they know-
basically ego.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. Absolutely. And because it's no more simpler than that. That library, right? If you have a building below,
Ground level, yeah.
below ground level, where you think the water going? And it's a library. Where you think the water going? I remember when they built that, and I asked my father, Dad, how much mold gonna be in that thing? He said, we're gonna be crawling all over. He said, watch and see. First big rain, and this is back when we had rain. Big rain. The water was going up the walls.
Come by the street, man.
I remember, yeah.
Yeah.
They always had sandbags around the doors. In fact, you couldn't open certain doors because the water would get in. The
That's
children's
right.
room.
That's right. You have the water rushing out the back and the side because it was filling the building. You see? But that, I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, I think it opened up the door for people to ask more questions, and for future planning, we have to be able to systematically allow expertise to fuel our decision making.
Absolutely. Now, I also believe when they say trust but verified, because we have some shysters around here.
Okay, tell us the story.
And-
Tell us about the story.
No, well, we had a whole lot of people say they could do this, they could do that, they could do the other.
Okay.
But then when you really look, they don't know what they're doing.
Seems like same things happening here now.
Yes. Like the brick that needed to be
Am I
fixed
there?
twice.
Am I there?
Or
Twice.
bringing in people like I simple Google search would have showed not to mess with this individual.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, but it's true. I don't know why there's this dynamic that you trust a stranger but not who you know. Right?
I guess because I like the decision, and I guess people have, feelings about that. And so there's a mistrust internally.
I think again it's more ego.
Okay, here you go. All right.
You know, I think there's a lot of ego that we're still pushing through. I think that persons who cannot open their mind, accept a new thought, will always think that somebody's trying to put one over on them. You know, and some things just change. You know, I remember when we had dial-up internet, and now it's on my phone.
Can I say that number my age?
If you want to date yourself, go ahead.
Yeah. I think we all have experienced that.
It's like,
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, I'm looking
Yeah.
at time, so we're almost at a half an hour already.
Okay.
This has been part 1 with former Senator Hansen. We'll be back shortly, back at Federal Leaf Inn, Dialogue 340.